Hello and welcome to Java lecture number 3. This lecture is going to be mainly on what we call Boolean data types, as well as what is known as the if statement. So let's get started. In the past, we looked at 3 specific data types: the int, the double, and the string. And so we learned how to create a variable, how to assign it a value depending on what kind it is, and basically the 3 categories so far that we've seen of these data types that can hold a specific value. So if there's an int and you call it x, you can put an integer in it, but only an integer. You can't put 3.5 in there. Likewise, for a double, you can store any decimal type value. And then for a string, it's some sort of sequence of words, a string of characters that are enclosed within quotations. And so just as a little exercise real quick, why don't you pause the video for a moment if you need to and look at this program here and try and figure out what the output would be. And so once you've done that, let's look at what this program is going to do. I've set an integer called x equal to 7, a double called y equal to 4.64, and a string called name equal to Dr. Smith. And so then, as I go down the instruction line, so all of this is just initialization. There's no magic happening yet. But these are these 3 command lines that are going to get read line by line. Each of them has a semicolon after it as a punctuation. And I'm telling the system to print out x, then print out y, and then print out name. But we've already defined x, y, and name to respectively be 7, 4.64, and Dr. Smith. So it should be no surprise that when I run this program in the console down here, we see 7, 4.64, and Dr. Smith on 3 consecutive lines. So hopefully that was a nice little review of what we've done in the past and seeing all of that come together. So now we're going to talk about what's called a Boolean. Boolean, the word looks like this in case you're wondering how it's spelled. Boolean. And we do see that it highlights up in purple, which means that it is one of the Java keywords. And what a Boolean ultimately is just a true or a false. It means that something is true or something is false. There's no in between. You can't store numbers, you can't store letters, characters, or anything of the sort. You just get a true or a false. And true or false are also kind of keywords in Java. So I could make a Boolean called my Boolean and set it equal to true. And if I ask it to print out at the bottom here, my Boolean, then Java will kindly print out true. Likewise, if I set it equal to false, Java will print out false. If I try to set it to 9, Eclipse will yell at me, and it says change type of my Boolean to int. And so it's trying to help you, and it's trying to say, well, you're apparently trying to store a 9 into something, so instead of trying to store it into a Boolean, why don't you store it into an int? But what Java does not know is that we actually, do want to store a Boolean. So be careful there. Don't blindly click on its recommended fixes. But that would be a recommended fix if you were, in fact, trying to store a number. So make sure that this matches whatever type you're trying to put into it. And so there are certain statements. You can make a mathematical statement. You learn about inequalities, and you would say something like 3 is less than 5. And you would say that is a true statement. So 3 is less than 5. We'd say that that's true. If I said 3 is greater than 5, that would be a false statement. And what it turns out is that if you take one of these statements, something like this, in Java, you can take that, and that actually has a value. So it'll essentially evaluate the expression and tell you whether or not it's true. And so this actually has a value of false. You know how something like 5 plus 8 has a value that's equivalent to 13? Well, in the same sense, 3 less than 5 sort of equals true. And I put equals in quotations because it's not, it evaluates to true. It is a true statement, so it's kind of a pseudo equals. And so this has that value, just as 13 has a value, or just as 13 has a value, and that value is equivalent to the value that 5.8 has. 3 less than 5 also has a value, and that value is equivalent to true. And so when we're dealing with, here, I'll clear some of this out. So when we're dealing with ints, I could say something like system.out.println 5 plus 3. And we will get, here, I'm going to copy that to the clipboard and get rid of it real quick. And we will print out 8. In the same sense, I could put 3 less than 5 here, and it'll print out true, which shows us that 3 less than 5 does in fact have a value of a Boolean type. And so with that said, just as we could say 3 plus 5 and get an 8 here, we could say int x equals 3 plus 5. Right? So x is really 8, but we could print out x here and find that x still equals 8. It's the exact same thing. All you're doing is translating from here to there. We could also make a Boolean called myBoolean. Not a very common name for it, but for example, unless there's a context, I can't think of a whole lot better name for it. myBoolean, and let's have that set equal to 3 is less than 5. It seems kind of weird to have equals 3 less than 5. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you could even put parentheses around there so you know that that has its own little value, and the 3 less than 5 is protected inside the castle walls of these parentheses. And so if you go to print out myBoolean, you will find that it is true. We've effectively set myBoolean equal to true by saying that 3 is less than 5. If I say that 3 is greater than 5, that's not true. MyBoolean will be initialized to false because that is equivalent to being false. And when I print out myBoolean here, when I print out whatever the value of this is, I will see that it is false. So that's kind of a first glance at Booleans and how you can store a value into them. You can either say, equals false, something like that. You can say that it's true, or you can put a statement like that here. I'll even show you how to use some variables as well. So we'll say int x equals 3, int y equals 5. We'll say that myBoolean is x less than y. And think about what that value is going to be real quick. So, is x less than y? Well, x is 3 and y is 5. So yes, x is less than y. So we'll expect a true, which we get. If I shuffle things around, if I say x equals 300, y equals 5, is 300 less than 5? No, 300 is not less than 5 by any standards. And so if I print out the value of my Boolean, which is now whatever the result is when you compare 300 and ask if it's less than 5, you will see that it will kindly spit out a false in the console here. And so that's essentially how Booleans work. You can use them with variables, you can use them to compare things, and then using your system.out.println, you can assess the value to kind of peek in and see what's happening under the hood when you're messing around with these variables and comparing them. So now what I'm going to do is introduce the if statement. And so I'm going to, I guess I'll keep this stuff up here. But I'm going to clear this for now. And I'm going to show a little framework. If, with parentheses around it, and then you go to the next line, open curly brace, hit enter, Eclipse will create a matching pair for you. And if you didn't know yet, if you click on a particular curly brace, it will put a little box around its partner so that you can easily track these. And if you end up with a partnerless curly brace, Eclipse will also alert you with a red mark. And so something is going to go in here. And what goes in here has to be a Boolean. And basically, if the Boolean in here is true, then Java, your program, will go through and conduct whatever actions you have specified here, 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 straight down the line. And when it gets to the end, it will continue reading along here, etc., and down those lines. If this value is false, then it will ignore everything inside here and jump straight to here. So we need something that has a Boolean value. Well, true is a Boolean value, right? So let's start there. If true, system.out.println the value inside the if statement is true, which must be true, because if this code runs, the value in here must have had to have been true in some form or another. Here we're explicitly saying it's true. So if I run this, it says the value inside the if statement is true. But there's another Boolean we have too. We've created a Boolean called myBoolean. And essentially, we can say if myBoolean, then go inside here. And this seems kind of strange at first, because if myBoolean, it doesn't sound like you're doing anything, but if you translate over here, you can actually see that we're asking if x is less than y. And is x less than y? No, it is not. And so myBoolean will be false, just like we saw it was earlier. And, well, I'll show you first. If false, then we shouldn't expect any code in here to run, because by the nature of the if statement, it will only run if the value inside here is true. So we should see absolutely nothing, because it'll get to the end here, it'll see that there's nothing left, and your program will terminate. So let's verify that. Nothing. So let's translate this to myBoolean. Now instead, we're going to be looking at this, because by the transitive property, these are the same. We should also expect nothing. But if I flip this around here, 3 is less than 5, though. So myBoolean will be true. And then you will run this code inside here. The value inside the if statement is true. Now this is a little bit unusual, but I was just showing it is proof of concept. Usually what you would do is say if x is less than y. Because in the very beginning, we established that x less than y does in fact have a Boolean value. X is either less than y, in which case it is true, or x is not less than y, in which case it is false. Those are the only two options, and in either case, you do in fact end up with a Boolean value. And it will run accordingly. So we don't need this right now. And if x is less than y, then we can even say x is less than y. And so we should expect that since 3 is less than 5, and it's asking if x is less than y, that will evaluate to true. And since the value inside the if statement that is a Boolean value is true, this code will run. X is less than y. And if we flip things around, say 30, nothing. So this is for explicitly less than. If you wanted to know if something was less than or equal to y, you put an equal sign here. That is the less than or equal to. whoops. And this is the greater than or equal to. So those are those two operators. And so essentially you just take your normal symbol and put an equals after it, and that allows it to be inclusive. So now, well, I'll switch back to beforehand where it was just the less than. X is not less than Y. They're equal to each other. And so nothing will happen since it's not true that X is less than Y. But if I switch it to less than or equal to, if both of these guys are 5, then when I run it, X is less than or equal to Y. And note that it doesn't, this is irrelevant. Like I could put peaches in here and it would still run and you'd get peaches. I just happen to be switching the statements so that, you know, the message we get in our box reflects what we're actually checking. So there's nothing special about the text I'm putting in here. It doesn't care. It's just, its only instruction is to print out the text if this command gets to run inside the if statement. But besides that, it could care less. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, so that is X is less than or equal to Y. Now what we could do, we could put another if statement after. We could say if X is greater than Y, then print out X is greater than or greater than Y. Okay, and these are essentially one of these has to happen. If you're not less than or equal to a number, you have to be greater than the number. There are no, there aren't any other options. If I had just made these less than and equal than, or sorry, less than or greater than, then you wouldn't actually have the option covered where they were equal to each other, since both of them would evaluate to false. But this will basically test our numbers. X is less than or equal to Y, since they're equal. Now if I say that X is 8, X is greater than Y. So this one will run for sure. X is less than or equal to Y. 8 is not less than or equal to 5, so it'll ignore this. So we should expect it to say that X is greater than Y, which it does. And so that is essentially, I think, where I'm going to end this video. What you can see is that in general, when you have an if statement, well, not in general, always, when you have an if statement, whatever your argument is on the inside, whether it be a variable name or an expression like this, or just flat out true, it has to be a Boolean value. And we've seen through the introduction of the Boolean variable type that all three of those things can be equivalent. You can have something hold a Boolean value that's a variable, you can have a comparative expression like this, or you can just type the word. But either way, in any of those three cases, they all hold a Boolean value and are perfectly valid for putting inside an if statement. In future videos, we'll talk about more advanced comparative expressions, something like, if x equals 5 or y equals 8, then do this. If both of them are greater than 5, do this. If neither of them are equal to 5, do this. And so we'll be able to really fine-tune our logic and allow us to control the flow of a program depending on whether or not certain conditions are met. And as soon as possible, I'm going to really try and get some user input going where you can type into the console and it'll maybe ask you for an X and ask you for a Y. And then it'll tell you something about the numbers, whether or not they're even or odd, or something like that, so that we're not just modifying variables within the program, because ultimately you shouldn't really have to modify a program in order to use it for its function. And so as soon as possible, we will certainly get away from having these kind of self-contained programs that you can only use by toying around with numbers in the code. But with that said, I hope that was a helpful video, and I will see anybody who wishes to continue watching in future lectures.